What is your musical identity? Now, that's an interesting question that someone posed on my channel. Oftentimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll check my YouTube numbers, maybe answer a couple of comments, go back to sleep, right? So a guy that works for one of the Allman Brothers, the Sons of the Almonds or something like that, he runs a psychedelic sort of 60s style light show for them, right? And he commented on my tribute band video, and he says, I watched one of your demo videos, and he says, you seem more like a funk, jazz, rock fusion player than a metal or country player. What is your musical identity? That is a great question, okay? And I think a lot of people can relate to this. I want to hear from everybody in the comments, because here's the deal. And we got Ace walking around, and that's why the camera's shifting. But here's the deal. Music, right? To me, music is just a means to be able to play guitar. And I've always been able, even when I was a little kid playing guitar, I've always been able to adapt to different styles and play in different situations. And I found that if I adapted, then I could do the one thing that I wanted to do, which was play guitar, right? Because look, none of us know in life what we're going to get the call for. What are we going to get called to play? Opportunities present themselves in life. One of the first opportunities that presented itself to me as a kid, outside of playing in a garage band, you could say a garage band or a Sunset Strip band or an original band. That's like a startup business, right? But if that startup business doesn't take off and get you bookings and do all this other stuff, you could be just stuck in that garage, right? The weekly rehearsals, the guys start showing up later, people start missing rehearsals, and nothing's going on, right? But I learned early on when I got the call as a kid, got asked to play guitar in folk group. Okay, well, I guess I started out playing acoustic guitar like a lot of kids back then. We didn't just start on electric guitar. And, so, hey, if you want to play guitar at school, you can play in the folk group, right? And so that opportunity presented itself. And I did that, right? And then one day in folk group, they said, hey, this song we want to do has a guitar solo in it. And this is something that you would be good at. And would you want to do this? And I listened to the song and said, this is great. I get to play lead guitar in mass, right? In a Catholic mass, I got to play an electric lead guitar. So we have our friend wants to join us, right? So getting to play lead guitar in church, in mass, right, at school. And I can remember I've told this story before. It was a big commotion when all of a sudden that lead guitar erupted out of that mass. Catholic masses are different. Everybody nowadays, especially in the black church, you have, electric guitar and bass and keyboards and drums and all this. It's probably music better than a lot of concerts. Most concerts wouldn't have musicianship on that level. But man, we're talking back in the early 70s, man. And playing electric lead guitar in a mass in Williamsburg, Virginia, where I grew up, that was pretty much unheard of, right? But that was an opportunity that presented itself to me. And I took that opportunity, right? So getting to play in different situations, getting to play different types of music, right? Now look, when I went to GIT out in California, before that, when I was a kid playing in high school, another opportunity presented itself when I went to public school. Hey, they have a jazz band, right? So if you learn to play the parts, you learn to comp the chords in the jazz band, then you can play in another situation at school. You could take your guitar and not only that, but you would get to travel. We would go travel and play gigs during school days. So I would get to miss school and go play guitar with the jazz band, get on the school bus and travel somewhere, right? So think about that. You know what? I could have said, I'm not a jazz guitar player. I don't want to play jazz. I want to play rock. Well, then that would have been an opportunity that I would have not been able to play. Think about that. I know there's a lot of people who are elitists and they go, I wouldn't play that music, or I don't think playing on a Nashville record. And I'm sure there's people that would rag on the artists that I played with, and they have done so in the past, and that's fine. But here's the deal. The bottom line is a gig, right? And I don't look down on tribute bands. I don't look down on wedding bands or corporate bands or guys that play on country gigs. Even though I'm not a huge fan of country music, there are other genres that I would like to play more than country. But the bottom line is a call comes in and they go, we want you to play with this country group and you're going to work this much and you're going to get paid this much. And, do you want the gig? And that comes down to everything in life. Do you want the gig? Do you want to make money? Do you want to starve? Or do you want to go work? And that is a very real thing, because you can even have a gig already, but that gig is starting to not get a lot of bookings. They don't maybe need the bookings as much as you do as a professional player. Maybe they're longer established, had a longer career, and they're okay with slowing down. And at that point, when another call comes in, and it happened for me, I had to go and do something else. I had to go play a different genre. The same thing came, when I was studying music out in Los Angeles, right? The Sunset Strip was happening and had all these bands and stuff, and bands were getting signed right and left and yada, yada, yada. And opportunity was there, right? So, at the time, I played guitars with Floyd Roses anyway. That's what I played at the time. So it wasn't a stretch going back and playing some of those Van Halen style riffs and things like that, things in that genre. I had never tried to copy Eddie Van Halen note for note, but I certainly loved what he did. I certainly understood the task. I understood the musical genre so that I could change my musical identity, right? And so when the Sunset Strip popped off and I got a chance, I answered an ad, I ended up going and playing hair metal or hard rock or whatever you want to call it, Sunset Strip rock. You can't help but infuse some of your personality into whatever music you're playing. And I studied, I've got an honors degree from Musicians Institute, GIT, in jazz fusion, right? In fusion. But here's the deal. When I get on a country gig, there is no chance that I'm going to use any of that fusion stuff 99.9% of the time playing with a country artist. That's the hard reality of it. You've got to play the right way or style for the gig, right? And again, a gig is a gig. Do you want to work or do you want to starve? Okay, those are the two choices. You only get, you don't get to pick and choose your opportunities. I guess I could have been more proactive and not waited on calls to come in and pursued getting calls for gigs that I wanted. But even then, you can only take the opportunities that come in. And what you have to do, here's why. Why do I have all these different guitars? Why do I have a bunch of pedals? Why did I have a whole bunch of different amps? Because you have to have the right tools for the job. You can't show up, at least initially, on a gig with the wrong gear, the wrong tools, right? You've got to try to go, oh man, I got this gig. I'm going to need this type of guitar. I'm going to need this type of amp. I'm going to need to put together a pedal board for the gig. You listen to the material and then try to replicate it as best you can. And so that means going, and look, here's the deal. If a guy is recording with multiple different studio guitarists in the studio, chances are they're all going to be playing different rigs. They're all going to use different pedals and all that stuff. You've got to approximate the tones as best you can, as close as you can, right? But it's never going to be 100%. It is my hands. It is my heart. It is my soul that ends up having to play somebody else's parts. And that's an important thing to realize. And you can do a great job of copying the parts, getting on the gig. And then maybe once you get on the gig, you realize, I realized when I got on one of my country gigs, actually both of my country gigs, that, man, ultimately these guys want a rockin' guitar player. And I can let my hair down, and I can play some different guitars, and I can run to the front of the stage and do a shreddy solo. But you don't start out that way. You start out playing the parts that are in the music. You start out showing up with the right tools for the job until you realize, maybe I need to bring some different tools to this gig. And I've never played in a Southern rock band, but if I was going to play in a Southern rock band, I'd probably, have some kind of, maybe a vintage Marshall rig and a Les Paul or an SG. If I was going to try to play traditional country, of course, I'd have to have maybe a Fender, maybe a AC30 and a Telecaster. If I'm going to go back and play 80s hard rock or metal, I'm going to have to probably get a different guitar right now, because I only have one guitar with a Floyd Rose, and it's one of the modern Wolfgangs, and it for me, it's not the same feel. It's a different feel. So this is very real stuff, right? I think, and let me know in the comments. I know there's a lot of players. To me, music is music. And it's the same thing. Here's the thing. My skill set of being able to play multiple genres and being able to play some jazz and some fusion. I don't consider myself an expert in any musical style. But I do know how to play guitar, and I do know how to make it sound good, right? And I know how to get different tones. And the one gig that actually I get to use everything that I do, the one type of gig that requires being able to cover a lot of different genres and a lot of different styles, that is a wedding gig. That is a corporate gig, where you start out the night playing some jazz and maybe a little blues, and then maybe you do some R&B ballads, right? And then you go on and then you go into the heavy dance stuff and the funk stuff and the disco, and and then you crank out some classic rock, and then maybe dip your toes in playing maybe an 80s track or two. And then maybe you play some, finish it out and play some, modern version of the same thing, and play some Bruno Mars. That kind of gig, you play every single style of music pretty much up until 2010, when the Gent and all that kind of stuff came out. But man, you will play everything, right? And you've got to figure out how to do all that on one guitar or two guitars. Think about that. That's why I still play guitars. When I was doing those gigs, call them Swiss, give me a Swiss Army knife guitar. That's what I'm going to use on that. But I would not take a Super Strat to go play an Allman Brothers style gig. I would play a Les Paul, or I'd play an SG, depending on, what part I was going to play. And I would not play any of my outside playing or any of my fusion playing on a gig like that. And I wouldn't play any of my funk playing on a gig like that. But would I rely on having a strong groove? Absolutely. I would do that. And this is a very important message. If you're a young player, man, don't be a music snob. Don't try to think you're above of anything, because, man, your wallet doesn't care what style of music it pays, you play. Your wallet doesn't care. Your electric bill doesn't care. Your rent doesn't care. Your landlord doesn't care. Your landlord only cares that you pay your bills each month. And that is the reality of all of this, man. If you're a working musician, you can't afford to be finicky. Take the calls that come in and do your best playing the music that you can. That is the only musical identity that I have, is trying to do the best I can on the gig that I'm on. That is